Side.
Cool.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Sunny, for joining me today to tell Noah about quite a controversial topic that has really divided people, which is ironic considering it's a phrase that has joined two cultures, Tongan Malu, and it's caused a massive rift among Tongans and Samoans. So firstly, I want to ask, how do you respond, or how do you sit in all of that?
It's it's um it's quite a complex issue. Um and there's lots of different narratives involved. And I think I certainly want to contribute some stories to help people make sense or make other sense of the issue. I guess for me, if I can start by explaining my bias and why I believe what I believe. So I was raised in an education system that the whole narrative of who the Pacific people are was not only silent, but the very few things that they had to say about us were things like we weren't intelligent. So we couldn't have navigated the Pacific. We paddled everywhere, which is why we're big and strong and why we're good at sport. And so, that whole narrative of we weren't intelligent, we paddled everywhere. They subscribed to Thor Airedale's so-called experiments in the 50s. And so that was the education system I grew up in. And so part of, while I was disconnected to my culture, my language coming up through high school, part of when I left school, a few years after I left school, I did waka ama as a way of connecting to my culture because this is what I was told who we were. And so I loved waka ama, enjoyed it, did it for about 2 or 3 years. And then I was 40 and I was doing my master's and I came across Captain Cook's encounter with a Tahitian war party. And so this is Professor Damon Salesa, um, Dame Anne Salmon, and a few other historians um, who had leaned on Captain Cook's diaries to unpack this account. And so Captain Cook pulls up alongside a Tahitian war canoe and finds that the Tahitian war canoe is bigger than the Endeavour. And so, for comparison's sake, the Endeavour is about the size of a basketball court. And so, when I just read that part, I thought, what? But I thought we paddled the Pacific on these small, 6 pack waka ama, and I'm seeing this Tahitian war canoe that's bigger than the Endeavour, and that just blew my mind. And then Captain Cook wants to test the Tahitian war canoe for speed, and Captain Cook notes that for every 2 miles he sailed, the Tahitian war canoe sailed three. So not only was it bigger, it was also faster than his sea vessel. And that just blew my mind because I was told we paddled, and now here's the sailing vessel that's faster and bigger. And then the sail design, Captain Cook called our sail design uh, crab claw design. But the thing is, a crab's claw's got nothing to do with traditional navigation. And in fact, when you unpack some of the stories, the the strange design of our sails back then imitates a bird's tail. And so um, the conclusion I reached was really definitive. And I decided right then and there, we must tell the stories about ourselves. Because when we leave it to other people who don't have the cultural frameworks we have, they will misinterpret, even calling our sail design a crab claw design without even knowing where the crab claw design, so-called design comes from. And then Alston Best, an anthropologist who wrote a lot about Maori culture and language, when he saw the Tongan kalia, he said the underside of the hull imitates the underside of a dolphin. So our design of sea vessels, we've got sails that imitates the bird's tail. We've got hull designs that imitates a dolphin. Just the whole thing of indigenous science. Our science came from the master scientist herself, Mother Nature. So that's where our science comes from. We were masters of STEM before there was such a thing as STEM. So that's our history. All of that is all of that is ignored when you hear Captain Cook say crab claw design. When crab's claw is has nothing to do with it. Anyway, so that's the whole thing of telling the stories about ourselves. And then that then led me to this other conclusion of in Western cultures, when they have knowledge, they write it down in a piece of paper, put the paper in a book, put the book in the library. If you want to learn, you go to the library and read, or you go to school. But in our cultures, we store our knowledge in song and dance, on our bodies, in the stars, on our va'a, in the forest, in the mountains. That's our library. And so if you want to learn about us, you sing, you dance, you voyage, you get a tatau, you spend time in the forest, because that's where our library is. That's where we store our knowledge. So the body of customs and traditions that make up all these different islands, it's not just customs and traditions. That's our library. That's our record book. And so that's where our stories are kept. So if you want to learn about us, that's where you go. And so, long live the written tradition, and long may it continue. And we should read and be literate and all of that. Long may that live. But beyond that, we also have other ways of storing knowledge, other ways of knowing, other ways of learning. And so I lean on those probably more than I lean on literature. I embrace oral traditions and stories and people's encounters and experiences. I embrace that alongside the written tradition, but I give more weight to the oral traditions, because that's not only where we store our stories and our knowledges, but also we are more likely to learn about us in those stories, not in the written stories. And so, academia is about turning a lot of those stories into literature, so that our stories can be kept in that way as well. So the stories I'm about to unfold are stories that come from that bias, that the oral traditions, people's stories and experiences, I will embrace. And I'm not afraid of hearing different and contradictory stories, because we didn't have this concept of the single narrative. To us, it was all right it was all right to have contradictory explanations and experiences, and everyone's experience was okay to embrace. It was okay to live with contention. It was okay to live with paradoxes. There was nothing wrong with it. And so I'm mindful that the stories I'm about to share, there are people that might have counter stories. Cool, bring those stories out. The reason why a lot of our oral traditions are lost was because we stopped telling stories. One of the weaknesses of oral traditions, once you stop singing, once you stop talking, once you stop sharing stories, you start forgetting. And so, if some of the stories I share brings out contradictions, bring it out. Correct me. If I've got the wrong story, correct me. I want to hear those stories, and I want to be telling, if there are more accurate and better versions of what I share, bring them out, educate me as well. But it's no good being in the shadows and people keeping them to themselves, because that's how we lost all of these knowledges in the first place, eh? So so that's where I come from. So some of the stories I'm about to share come from that place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely awesome. I love that because I totally resonate with that, with understanding our indigenous ways of storytelling and the truth and I guess the core center of how we came to be who we are. So thank you for sharing that. So I guess with in terms of inviting discussions and opposing views, do you think that the way that this has played out, being on social media, having being in a time where social media is sort of our space of talanoa these days. How do you see this talanoa having played out there?
Well, it's tough, because I think social media is not a reliable place to have these conversations. I think it's still better face to face, or in groups even. People are getting into podcasts. Yeah, but social media is such a tricky forum, and it invites a lot of. I don't mind the discussion, and I don't mind the counter narratives, but it also invites a lot of scorn, a lot of and people just playing around with the discussion. Whereas if we were in a proper forum, that would get people would be dealt to straight away. Say, hey, let's just focus on this, and you can't, you don't get that monitoring in social media. So I think it's a dangerous place to have these discussions, but that's where these discussions are. And so there's no way we're going to shut that down. We just have to figure out a more intelligent way of going about it that way. So I think it was a brave move for the sisters to come out publicly like they did, because then that invited everyone in on the discussion. And so that's what social media does. But then again, you can't keep this quiet. The whole point of what we're doing is to share. And so, yeah, my hope is I can help bring other stories to the table that people can pick and choose from. I think the, 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 the bottom line for me is who is a Samoan, because the divisiveness that's in the discussion is, oh no, it's a Samoan this, it's a Tongan that. And so the question for me is, who is a Samoan that they are entitled or not entitled to whatever is declared Samoan? And so I think my position is that when you let the divisions of the Pacific dictate who is a Samoan, if we let these Western national boundaries tell us who was a Samoan, then I think that's where we get in trouble. So to say that only Samoans can have this, we then lean on the idea that only people that live on these set islands are Samoans. So if you don't live in Savaii and Upolu and Manono and Apolima, if you don't live on those islands, you are not Samoan, or if you don't connect to those islands. And I think that's because we have let the Western national boundaries tell us who's a Samoan. And so the question is, what about American Samoa? Are they Samoan? They compete against us. They compete against us in the Pacific Games. They have their own team, their own flag. And then when there's Commonwealth Games, they don't even feature in it. It's just us. And yet at the Olympic Games, they're not even there altogether. They compete under a completely different flag. And according to that flag, the USA flag, they are more aligned to First Nations Americans than they are to us. And so if we let these national boundaries tell us who is Samoan and who isn't, our own people, American Samoans, are put under a completely different nation. Okay, let's put that aside then. The island of Olosenga or Olohenga, about 100 years ago, a Palangi family bought the island, renamed it Swains Island, put it under Tokelau, and then strangely they participated in the blackbirding of their own people. That family arranged for Peru, or slavers based in Peru, to come and steal about a third of Tokelau's population to participate in the blackbirding practice of that time. Anyway, so Swains Island is under Tokelau, but the history of Olosenga is Manua. Their bloodlines, all their genealogies come back to Manua. And so are they Samoans? According to the national boundaries that the Westerners have made, they're not. But according to their genealogies, which is how we count who are our people, they are us. Okay, let's put that aside. The story I'm about to share, a small group of us visited Tonga in the mid-90s, and we got an audience with the king of the time, King Taufa'ahau IV. He's the father of the current king. And so we had an audience with the king. He was unable to actually share time with us, but he sent his historian to have a conversation with us and to explain to us the king's position on the relationship between Samoa and Tonga. And the king's historian asked us, what do we know about the relationship between Tonga and Samoa? Me being the Fiapoko, I said, all I know is that Tonga used to rule over Samoa for a few hundred years up until the rebellion. And then the Tongan's historian, the official position of the Tongan king, he said the story of Tongan Samoa is not one people ruling over another people. The story of Tongan Samoa is one people divided by class, a ruling class and a working class. And after a few generations of cruel leaders or dictators, the working class became a slave class. And what history tells us about slavery, rebellion always follows slavery. Nobody wants to be a slave. And so the rebellion happened, and then the rebellion was successful. The ruling class left. And so the ruling class, they went south. The islands they came to, they named Tonga. Tonga in every Pacific language means south. Even here in Aotearoa, Te Tai Tonga refers to the southern tribes. And then the Tongan king said the ruling class that couldn't go south, they went north. The islands they came to, they named Tokelau, meaning north. In every Pacific language, Tokelau means north. In Samoa, we say Tokelau. Here in Aotearoa, Te Tai Tokerau referred to the northern tribes. And so here's us ancestrally, genealogically, one people, but the national boundaries invented by Westerners have made us different people. And so when we say the question, Samoan this and Samoan that, and Tongan this and Tongan that, we are ignoring our ancestral links, our genealogical links, and we are letting these Western divisions tell us who was us and who was not us. I really like what Le Tōwhai Tu'u'u Kalala said. Even if you have just a little bit of blood that's connected to me, you are mine, I am yours. And so to me, that's that extension. We are, even if it's just a little bit genealogically connected, however many thousands of years ago, they are us, we are them. So how can we say, no, the Tongans can't have this because it's not theirs? When we only come to that divisive position because we've let the Western national boundaries tell us who is Samoan. And the concept of Samoa and Tonga go way deeper than these national boundaries. And so, even as far as some of the islands in Solomon, Taumako, and some of the islands around Taumako, when they unpack these genealogies, they ngafa back to Sava'i. Some of the royal titles in Rarotonga, Uenuku, Tangi'ia, and Karika, they ngafa back to Sava'i. And so when you ask the question, who was a Samoan? Exactly. But we have to answer that question not using these national divisions that the Western world have imposed on us. When we look at those deeper histories, you see that we are deeply connected to a lot of the other, or actually all of the other islands, that perhaps it's true to say there is no Tongan Malu. In fact, it is right to say there is no Tongan Malu, because the concept of Tonga and Samoa and Cook Island and all of that are not our words. But when we use our words and our ways of determining who was ours, then these women who live in the islands considered Tonga have every right, because ancestrally, genealogically, they are us, we are them. And so they have every right to do what they've done because, it belongs to them. The fact that they call it Tongan and call it Samoan, I think that's where we're having these problems, because we've leaned on Western namings and Western national boundaries to determine that who was ours. We know who was ours, and it's in our bloodlines, it's in our genealogies. So that's my position on it.
Yeah.
We are more than these national boundaries that the Western world has imposed on us. Okay, I've talked a lot. I'll give it back to
No,
you.
that's okay. I love it because you're answering heaps of things here, and I'm like, oh look, yes, keep going, Matua. I got it. But I think that was it then, like especially where you said that's probably where we're getting where the divisiveness is coming from, is calling it a Tongan Malu, and then you've got the people claiming certain parts of it, but that's from that Eurocentric idea of saying that we are this, right?
Yeah.
So then, what would be a proper term to call it if we don't call it a Tongan Malu? What there? What would you say?
It's the same with the Tongan tatau, the means tatau. There was no such thing as a Tongan tatau. In the old days, when royalty wanted the tatau, they would get a voyaging fleet together and voyage to Samoa together, because we still practiced it. And so they didn't go to get a Samoan one, they got their one. It was theirs. There was no need to call it something else, because they had every right to have that. Now, the so-called Tongan tatau is a fairly new way of expressing Tonganness, and cool, that's the way cultures adapt. Cool. And because it's now different, they want to call it a Tongan tatau. Okay, that's the way the culture's adapting and developing. So be it. But there was no such thing as a Tongan one. This is historically because it was ours as a extended family of the Pacific. We all had it, and so the malu, cool. The patterns on the malu are not strictly Samoan patterns. They are patterns that are seen all over the Pacific. Um, and that's where I was making the comments that the original malu was the star map, because we all use the star map. We all used the same stars to navigate the Pacific until colonization brought an end to it. I really like the position Le Tofaya Ili Alpha Mayava put it. And he was talking about, in one of his posts, he was talking about the nose flutes and the restoration of the nose flute and how it was the Tongans that had brought back the nose flute. And you're saying, but people are calling it the Tongan nose flute, but it's not a Tongan nose flute. It was a nose flute we all used. It's just that the Tongans have restored it. And so he was saying, thank God that the Tongans have restored it for us. Because imagine if they had kept it to themselves and said, no, this is ours because we'll, find us keepers, you revive your own. But they didn't do that. They revived it. It's been called the fangu, but it was something that we all had. And I really want to add to that something that I enjoyed that Eliota talked about in a recent post. Imagine if the Satawali's master navigator, Maupia, look, imagine if he took that same divisive approach and said, no, we're going to keep traditional navigation to ourselves. If you lost it, that's your fault. It's your problem. It is a Satawali's, it's a Micronesian thing. But he didn't do that. In the 70s, when the Hawaiians wanted to restore the art of traditional navigation, the Satawali's were one of very, very few islands in the Pacific that were still practicing it. And so Maupia went to Hawaii. He saw what colonization did to the indigenous people. He went back to Satawal and said to the elders, give me your blessing. I'm going to go teach the Hawaiians traditional navigation. And the elders in Satawal said, no, this is sacred knowledge. We're keeping it. It stays here. If you go, you are banished from this island. And Mao said, I've seen what colonization does. The native people in Hawaii, they don't even belong to their own. They have to fight to be a part of their own land. They are treated as second-class citizens. They have to fight for their language. And colonization and the westernization have shoved them to the side. And he said to the elders, if we don't share our knowledge and replicate it, the same thing's going to happen to us. And so the elders still said no. And so he was banished from his island. He went to Hawaii, taught the Hawaiians about traditional navigation, and he made them promise, you only do this under one condition. You are not allowed to keep this to yourself. You must share this knowledge. So the Hawaiians, over the decades, Hawaiians shared it with the Tahitians. They've shared it with the Cook Island. They've shared it with Aotearoa, and then, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, and all of that. And so imagine if Maupia had taken that divisive stance. No, they're not us. And so he said, they are us. There is no such thing as Polynesia and Micronesia and Melanesia. Those are Western boundaries that never existed for us. And he said, there's no such thing as Polynesian navigation and Micronesian navigation. It's just one navigation that we all practice. And he said the people on the east side of the Pacific, the stars that rise where they are the same stars that set where we are. And so the navigation was exactly the same. And so we are starting to learn about our history and traditional navigation because of him. When the elders saw what the fruit of the work that Maupia had done, they asked them back to the island, and they made an apology, made everything right. And now when people want to undergo the master navigation ceremony, they all go to Satawal for the poor master navigator ceremony. And so they've kept alive what we all practiced. And I think we need to see the Malu and the Tatau in that way. All the other islands of the Pacific have forgotten that heritage. So let's be good stewards of our cousins' knowledge, of knowledge that we all shared, and let's not be greedy with it. And let's be good stewards of it and pass it on to those who also had the same thing as us. That's my position. And so, of course, these sisters should have it. Their genealogical lines come back to us. You know, we are them, they are us. We embrace them as such, and the patterns that they get, well, that's on the tufunga to give. But I think that there are more telling motifs on the Malu that speak more about traditional navigation, and but that's up to the tufunga. That's up to the master tattooist. So that's my position. And again, a lot of that is because I've leaned on our own oral stories to embrace those stories, embrace the wider, yes, I'm Samoan, and long may that national boundary live. I'll carry the Samoan flag, Manu Samoa forever, the blue wave forever, and long may the Red Sea, the Tongan Red Sea, long may that live. They've taught people how to be patriotic,
Yeah.
and long may that continue. But we also have connections beyond those boundaries. And so let's not forget that. Let's not let these national boundaries divide us.
Mm, mm. No, that's beautiful, Talanoa, and I'm glad that you touched on as well about the motifs, seeing similar motifs in navigational styles throughout all of our people. So I guess for a cultural context of why a malu or a pe'a would be received, can you give us a little bit of a Talanoa about that, like a little bit of an insight as to why someone pre-colonial, pre-Christianity would have received markings like the malu or the pe'a?
Yeah, so this comes back to the whole thing of the when we let other people tell our stories. And so, reading a lot of the literature, I had read that tatau was marks of leadership, marks of a warrior. I thought, cool, I'm getting one. And so I got mine in 2012. And it wasn't until I got into that and I got it myself, spoke with others who have it, spoke with Tufunga, spoke with heaps of people about their voyage, their journey, the why they did it, how they did it, all of that. And and it was through those stories, the those who have the cultural framework to make sense of the tatau, that I learned that the tatau and the malu are not marks of leadership, they're marks of service. And so everything that's put on your body is your promise to your family. Here's your service to your family. And so, traditionally, if you got a tatau, you are saying to your family, anything the family wants, I'm the first in line. I'm the one that does this. I'm the one that does that. They're marks of service. And that's where you get the proverb, le ala i le pule o le tautua, the path to leadership is through service. And if you are true to your promise that you've marked on your body and you've served your family, then they're going to see your service and give you these chief titles, which is where you get your authority from. But that all comes from service. And so these marks are your promise to your family. I'm the first one you come to when it comes to service. I'm the first one to put my hand up. I'm the first one to bring money to the table. That's pretty much what your promise is when you get these marks. It's made me rethink my position on Fa'alawe Lave and the whole thing of Fesoswani. I used to be, oh no, I don't know them, I don't know this. And so since I got my tatau, I've started to rethink the way I serve my family and the way I do things. I've still got a long way to make it right in that regard, but I'm in a position where I can do more and better for my family in that regard. And so that's what the tatau was about. They're marks of service, not marks of leadership. Unmute. I can't hear you.
There we go. They're
Ah,
like fully sorry. They fully blew my mind because there's a whole other talanoa that I would like want to dive into about like what you were just speaking there. Like that I won't touch on because then we'll just go on this way. And I'm getting the Zoom notification, 10 minutes
Oh,
left. I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, so I'm Maori Samoan and I'm still on my journey of reconnection to my Samoan side and trying to navigate that trauma of it all and stuff. And I know for a lot of people, sometimes that first step to healing is receiving a tatau.
yeah.
And do you think that this would be a correct way to make those first steps, or is there more internal work that you'd need to do first before committing to, something like that? It's like something like receiving a tatau.
Um, there's a there's a lot in what you've asked, but let me just answer it this way. So the tatau is your marks of service to your family, and so when you are looking for whose permission to get, the only people's permission you need is your parents or the elders of your family. If you don't have parents, the elders of your family, because your service is to them, no one else. So if somebody from another part of the world is challenging, well, who are you to get the tatau? It's none of their business, because your service is not to that person. Your service is to your family. If your family say yes, no one else's opinion matters. Whether you speak the language, whether you know how to make the foods, or um, none of that matters. In fact, one of the ones that talks a lot about that, or not a lot, but he says a little that says a lot, is in the book of Tauchua by the late Tofaiono Tanuvasa. And he, in his book of Tauchua, he's saying that whole thing, tā mua mure ngutu, first tattoo your mouth, is not a traditional saying. It's a very recent saying invented by those who don't live in Samoa. Because in the old days, why would you say such a thing? Because everybody spoke Samoan. Before the days of colonization, there was no other language. So the concept of tā mua mure ngutu didn't exist back then. Um, and in fact, the late Tofaiono was saying, in the old days, um, there's the high chief, and then there's the tula fale, and the tula fale's job is to be the will of the high chief. Whatever the high chief wants, the tula fale makes happen. He wants food, the tula fale makes the food. He wants a wife, the tula fale goes to look for a wife. But there are certain villages where certain titles, only the songa imiti, the person that has a tatau, only they can serve the sa'o. And so that's where you get this opportunity where if you have a tatau, you get the opportunity to learn. Then you know how your oratory, what words to speak. And so this is where Tofaiona was saying in the old days, tā mua mua le tino, o nga maua role avano e hao mea whaasamo, o nga maua role poto le ngutu. First tattoo your body, then you get the opportunities to sit and learn with the knowledge holders, then your mouth will know what to speak. And so again, this is not something I invented. The late Tofaiona wrote about this in his book on Tauchua. And it was such a small, I think it was half a page that he wrote about that. Whoa, but the stuff that meant was, you could write another book on that. And so Tamo Mure Ngutu is not a traditional Samoan saying. It's a saying, and it looks like invented by those who live outside of Samoa. And I know definitely in my parents' generation, probably invented by them to stop us, our generation, from getting what they were banned from getting. Um, and so coming back to, all you need is your parents' permission, or the permission of your elders, because that's who your service was to. No one else's opinion mattered.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh. You just healed my whole inner child right there. If that's if that caught it all really, really did. It's so insightful as well because just quick scrolling through some of the reasons as to why people are debating in the comment section of this, they're peeling back so many different layers. And like you said, there's so many contextual layers, cultural layers to dive into here. So I thank you so much for taking me on this massive journey through time of our tatau. And my final question is she mentioned in her post that she's not trying to revive the Tongan stylistic way of this tatau. But what with that, even that word revival, like, and you were touching on it before, like how do you see more of our Pacific people reclaiming or stepping back into these traditional tatau markings of ours?
It's because of the national boundaries we now have that we think we're, Niue, Samoan, Tongan, Cook Island, because we think we are those national boundaries. I mean, you've seen some of the opinions. We're hardcore on these national boundaries, but I think as as a as a people, as different peoples, we need to soften that. And I think once we soften that, once we are embracing that they are me, I am them, once we embrace one another in that regard, then I think a real conversation can happen as to what is a traditional one, what are some of the more modern takes of a traditional one. In Samoa, we have this proverb, e tu maule, e sui le whainga, ai tu maule whaavai. Change the practice, but keep the foundation. And so if we're going to keep the foundation of the malu, what patterns can change? What patterns are more, when I was getting my tatau, um, one of the conversations I had with my tufunga, Suluape Alaiva'a, he said that the everything on the tatau, everything on the traditional tatau is to do with traditional navigation. And then one of the other tufunga li'ai whaiva imo said, that's true, but also we are an evolving people. And so some of the motifs we have now are more land-based motifs, land insects and stuff like that. And so, as the practice of tatau is, starting to be restored, they're starting to invent newer motifs for a more modern context. And so I think, as we embrace each other, as we become less divisive and more embracing, there can be better conversation about what they could look like, and more maybe agreements or even conversations around what are the patterns, what are the patterns that keep, and what are the structures that keep, and what are the structures that can evolve and adapt and change. But I think that's best had in a more kind and embracing environment, much more kinder than it currently is. But I think the more we bring some of these old stories together, and hear and learn from one another, I think the more we're going to see how much connects us compared to the very little that disconnects us. And it's through that colonial Western lens that there's a lot of division. And I think when we get past that division, we see, whoa, they are my brothers, they are my sisters, they are me, I am them. Hey.
Oh man, I love that so much. I don't know when it's going to cut me off, but I'll thank you so much for Talanoa, and I will email Israel thanking you for this,
Cool.
and I'll